I hope you are ready for a fun new soldering project because I have a great one for you today. I know you are going to love it. So gather your supplies and get ready. Hey friends, welcome back. My name is Laura Beth Love and I'm an artist and designer, and I'm the author of the books Soldered Alchemy and Boho Chic Jewelry, and today I'm going to show you how to make this really cool chunky bead necklace. Even if you are a beginner, you can do this project, so let's get started. And as I always say, if you are brand new to low-temp soft soldering and have no experience yet, be sure to check out my other jewelry making videos because you will learn a lot. I demonstrate a lot of the basics and talk a lot about tools and materials, so you don't want to miss those either. For this project today, I'll be using 20 gauge silver plated wire and a selection of large sized chunky beads. You can use whatever types of beads you like, but pick big ones. This necklace is meant to be bold. The tools I'm using to begin our project are wire straightening pliers, chain nose pliers, round nose, and wire cutting pliers. By the way, I list all the tools and materials you need for this project in the description below, so be sure to check that out. You're going to need a ruler or measuring tape, but if you don't have one of those, you can always estimate. First things first, make sure that your beads fit onto your wire, and once you've done that, we are ready to get rolling. I am measuring about a 16-inch length of wire against my ruler, and if it's a little tarnished, you can polish it up by running it through a piece of steel wool or a green Scotch-Brite pad, because it's very important that your wire is as shiny as it can be so that it will make it so much easier to accept the solder. Once you have your wire measured, shined up, you can use your wire cutting pliers to cut the length of wire that you measured from the spool. And the first thing we are going to do is create a wrapped loop on one end of the wire. And I'll demonstrate this also in another video very slowly if you are new to that technique. To make the wrap loop, what I'm doing in the video is I measured about 2 inches down from one end of my wire. I held the wire with my chain nose pliers and I bent over the short end to make an L shape. I switched out my pliers and grabbed my round nose pliers and positioned those on the short end of the wire right into where that corner is, and wrapped the wire around the pliers to create a loop. Next, you're going to grab the loop with your round nose pliers, and you can use your fingers or you can use your chain nose pliers to grab that short end of wire and create at least 2 wraps around the neck right below the loop. And you want to try to make your wraps nice and snug, and I kind of pull the wire a little bit up toward the loop so that the loops are right next to each other. Take your wire cutting pliers and then cut off that short end, and then we can thread our beads onto our wire. If there's a particular way that you want to thread them on, then you go ahead and do that. And just one after the other, and we checked earlier to make sure that they fit. That's like always the first thing you want to do. So thread on your beads. I am using 4 chunky beads for mine. You might want to use less, or you might want to use more. 4 or 5 I think makes a nice length. And once your beads are all threaded on there, we are again going to make a wrapped loop on the other end of the wire. That's the long end, and I'm going to demonstrate that again so you can see exactly how we do that. I'm grabbing my chain nose pliers and I'm holding it pretty close to the bead and using my thumb to push that long length of wire over to form an L shape. I'm going to remove those chain nose pliers, pick up my round nose pliers. I'm going to grip that wire right above where the bend is and use my fingers to bend it over my round nose pliers, creating that loop. And now I will reposition my round nose pliers to hold the loop while I use my hand to grab the long end of wire and very slowly and carefully wrap that long end of wire below the loop around the neck, creating some nice wraps. And try to be neat with them. We will be soldering over them, so they don't have to be perfect, but try to make them nice and neat. Take it slow, take your time. Remember, there is no rush. So our beads are now securely on our wire and we have a loop on each end. Now we're going to take that long tail end of wire and I am going to use my thumb to hold it against the bead and wrap it down and around the space where it meets the next bead. It's very simple. And when I come around from that second bead, I'm going to wrap it down over that bead, hold it with my thumb, and then wrap it in the space between the second and third bead, down over the third, hold it again, and then wrap it down again to the bottom bead, and then I'm going to wrap it around the neck. You can see I am not wrapping it completely around that loop. I just kind of hooked it on, and then the wire is going to travel back up the beads the same way it traveled down. So across a bead and then in between where the two beads meet, and then across the next one, in between where the two beads meet, across the next one, and so on and so forth until you reach the other end of your wire where your wrapped loop is. And I'm taking that tail end of wire and I'm going to wrap it around the neck below that loop a couple times. And you want both ends of the loops on each side of the string of beads to be kind of even. So I'm not going to wrap that entire leftover tail of wire around there, or it's one side's going to end up being chunkier than the other. So I'll use my wire cutting pliers. I'm going to get rid of that. I'm going to feel to make sure there's no little point sticking up. If there is, I'll use my chain nose pliers to give it a squeeze and press that down. So there is our beaded pendant, and now we are going to get ready to solder. I have a pair of pliers that I only use for soldering. I have an old cup with a disposable brush and some liquid flux. I have my soldering iron plugged in, turned on, and warming up and getting nice and hot, and I have some lead-free solder. You only ever use lead-free solder for jewelry making. We must apply flux to all areas of wire because solder will not stick to the wire unless it is coated with flux. So I'm using that disposable brush and I'm dipping into the flux and I am giving my wire a nice coating. And I'm going to pick up a small droplet of solder about the size of a grain of rice, and I'm going to hold the tip of my soldering iron against the metal because it needs to warm up for a moment for that solder to start flowing. And I am going to move the iron back and forth over the wire, starting at that loop. I coat the whole loop, both sides. I coat the wraps, and then we are going to travel down the string of beads just the way we did with the wire, and we're just going to coat all that wire. I'm going to put a small drop of solder where the wires cross, connecting them. And this takes, a little bit of patience and time. You can't go really fast because you want to make sure that your wire is completely coated with solder. And if we were to put a patina on this in the end, like say a black patina, the patina will not stick to places that do not have solder. So I'm going to leave this project nice and shiny and silver because I think that looks beautiful with these big turquoise colored beads. And I'm just going to continue down the project coating all that wire with solder. Now, if you are completely new to soldering, like I said earlier, you'll get tons of information from my other jewelry making videos, so be sure to check those out. And also my first book, Boho Chic Jewelry, covers all the basics and explains all the tools that you need for this type of soldering. And I'll put a link down below for that too. Now, what's great about soft soldering, also known as low-temp soldering, is that you're using a low temperature as compared to using a torch that you need to make sterling silver jewelry. So this is nice for people who don't want to use a torch. Maybe you are, afraid of a torch. I mean, I know plenty of people are, and that's okay. You can make beautiful jewelry using a soldering iron and the techniques in my books and that I show you in these videos. And I have so many more projects that I want to share with you. So I am so glad to be able to make these videos, and I really hope that you subscribe and check them all out. and I promise I will teach you lots of great things. So moving on with our pendant, again, coating that wire, and I'm turning it. You know, the wire goes around and around, so you want to just make sure that you really continue to put the flux on. It will evaporate from the heat from the soldering iron. So, you know, I do put a lot on, and I always say, you know, I prefer to use liquid flux. It comes in different forms, such as a paste. And I like the liquid because I'm using wire, and the liquid is going to run into all those little spaces like between the wraps and the wire. And, you know, I just like that. I think, you know, I used to be a stained glass artist years and years ago, and I have always liked liquid flux, and I just kind of stuck with it. But you could try different types and find out what works best for you. So yes, with low temp soldering, you are using a metal that melts at a much lower temperature. And, you know, with lead solder that you would use for stained glass, you know, that's really soft, that melts at a low temperature. But lead-free solder, you actually need a higher temperature to melt. That's why I always say, you know, try to get a soldering iron that is, you know, minimum of 80 watt and, you know, 100 watt ideal, but you're going to have trouble melting lead-free solder if you have a soldering iron, let's say from a craft store that's kind of a cheapie that, oh, you know, is like 20, 30, 40 watt. It's not going to get hot enough to melt lead-free solder. So I will do a video on my top picks for soldering irons for the year, and yeah, or maybe I'll do a blog post. I might put it on my blog. That's Dysfunctional Designs, and I'll link that below as well. But yes, you definitely want to use lead-free solder, and you always want to wear safety glasses. You want to have a well-ventilated area. If you have some kind of vacuum for the fumes, that's ideal, and you definitely need a mask. So yes, you never want to solder without protection. Protect your surface. Work on a, you know, protected surface. You want to keep your tables nice. And, you know, I always say it's great to have a little fire extinguisher in your house, and everyone should have one, whether you're doing crafts or soldering or not. You know, I'm surprised how many people don't. You can get a small one for like 20 bucks at a hardware store. So if you don't have a fire extinguisher, pick one up. So again, I have joined all of those crisscrossed wires with a drop of solder, and I'm going over them again, and I'm going to apply more flux, and I'm going to apply another drop of solder just to kind of make it like a nice little droplet on there. And, you know, take your time, make sure your iron is hot enough. If it comes to a point like that, you might need more flux. You might need to just kind of do it over again. And, you know, practice makes perfect. And just keep going and keep trying, and, you know, make sure you get some nice sized drops on where those wires cross, because that's going to add like this decorative element to our pendant. And you can make, you know, them kind of small. You can make the droplets pretty big. I like to kind of build them up and make them on the big side because, you know, like I said, we're going for bold and chunky, and it's just so pretty. If there's a spot where the wires do not cross and you want to add a drop, you can just heat up that wire with the tip of your soldering iron for a moment and just put a little drop of solder on there. It takes 1 or 2 tries sometimes to get it started, but you can see I did it right there, and I'm just going to add a little more until I reach the size of droplet that I'm happy with. And one other thing I wanted to talk about was the beads. Now, you have to be careful with soldering and beads. If you hold something hot against a bead for a long time, the bead will crack and break. This is especially true if you're using glass beads or small beads. I'm using stone beads, which is what I recommend for this project. You don't want to ever solder with plastic or anything that could melt or create some kind of fumes. So I like the stone beads. They're large. So when you're holding that soldering iron on that wire next to that bead, because it's a large size bead, it's going to absorb more heat and it's not going to break as quickly as a small bead would. So keep that in mind. And then another important thing about the beads you use when you're soldering is that many beads that you buy, I'm talking stone beads from, bead suppliers, catalogs, wherever you get your supplies from, a lot of beads that you buy are treated in one way or another, and this is very common. They don't, just get picked out of the earth and then holes drilled into them. They are dyed, a lot of them. They are hardened. They go through chemical processes, and some of those kinds of beads that have gone through those processes just don't mix with liquid flux or with the heat of soldering irons. So you want to be careful which type of bead you are using, and you want to be careful that once you apply that flux, that it doesn't damage the color of the bead or anything like that. So that's just a word to the wise to, know what you're using, and just to use a little bit of caution, because you don't want to take an expensive bead and then have it ruined unexpectedly. So now that we've gone over all of these dots on our project, I think it's pretty well done. I'm going to look to see if I think it's balanced, if I'm happy with it, and I am, so it's time to put on our chain. And we didn't have to solder any jump rings on or anything because we made those loops. So all I have to do is take a long chain, and I have it clasped on one end. I'm pulling it down to find the center, and then I'm just going to use my wire cutting pliers to snip apart that chain. So there's one end for each loop on the pendant. I have 2 jump rings that fit through the chain, and I'm going to open those up using 2 pliers, hook it onto my chain, and then, we will hook those onto the loops on the pendant. Now, when you're opening and closing a jump ring, it's very important that you're going to grab each end of the jump ring with a pair of pliers, but you're not going to pull apart. You're always going to put one going toward you and one going away from you, because if you pull them apart away from each other, you will never get that jump ring closed again. It is going to weaken and it's going to be out of shape. So as you can see, I twist one toward me and one away from me to open and close, and I'll show you once more. We're going to open this one, and I'm going to hook it on there, and I'm going to grab the other part of the jump ring with my pliers right there, and one's going to go toward me and one away. And that's going to make it nice and tight, a nice tight closure. You don't want to have a little gap where your chain can slip out. And there is our pendant. I also took it to my sink, and I used a soft fingernail brush and a little bit of liquid dish detergent under running water, and I scrubbed it down before I put my chain on. So that's our finished project. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you like it. If you did, give me a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe. I have lots of great projects coming up, and I will release a new video every Friday and sometimes in between. So be sure to check back soon. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time.